The Zelda community as a whole is a lot more worried about this game than I thought. I've made a list of the main concerns, the biggest reasons why people are curbing their expectations and are worried for the success and viability of Tears of the Kingdom. I think discussing the things that we're worried about is going to be a lot more helpful than just sitting in paranoia. But before we can get to that list, we need to go back in time. How did we even get here? Let's break down this journey of Breath of the Wild, the announcement of the sequel, and how excitement has dropped to an all-time low. If you don't care about this background and you just want the list, skip to this time code. This game came out and we just could not get enough of it. You wake up, you get your iPhone, you go for a little sightseeing. I feel like with Breath of the Wild, we talk a lot about how if you see something, you can go to it. But even more so, if you think you can pull something off, you can. And somebody's done it. And it's insane. Breath of the Wild won Best Game Direction and Game of the Year in 2017 when it was released.
The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
This is Nintendo's first Game of the Year win at the Game Awards.
It seems to be universally praised by critics and gamers alike. Breath of the Wild seems to be included in almost every single video game critic's 100 top games of all time lists. So I think I can speak for all of us when I say, as soon as Nintendo announced a sequel to Breath of the Wild, we freaked out.
Gosh! Just like there's a coughing fit.
I'm not okay!
I wish I had been YouTubing at the time and recorded myself because I lost it. And over the years since that announcement, I have never lost my hype. But maybe, just maybe, I'm a little innocent baby. See, according to a lot of commenters on my previous video, I am too young, too naive, and too new of a gamer to really understand. Here's the thing. I thought that we were all on board with this excitement. And then I started looking at YouTube video titles and thumbnails. It's not super encouraging, but take that with a grain of salt because it's YouTubers clickbaiting, right? I would never do that to you. But some of them seem pretty genuine.
To be completely honest, my excitement for it is at an all-time low.
I started wondering, like, should I be worried? I am fairly new to the video gaming world. I've been playing games for about 5 years now. I didn't really have the experience of most of you anticipating each new Zelda game all through elementary school and all through high school. Breath of the Wild came out, and then I started playing video games in 2017. So this is the first Zelda game I've ever waited for. So it's taking 6 years. I don't know any better. And then I released my Zelda video, where I tried to make the case that Tears of the Kingdom would be the best Zelda game we'd ever had. That video got noticed, and people started commenting, and the tone wasn't as excited as I thought it would be. I would venture to say that a significant portion of the Zelda fan base is genuinely worried that Tears of the Kingdom isn't going to be good, or at the very least, that it's going to live in the shadow of Breath of the Wild. And that's so sad, man. Like, video games are the entertainment portion of the world, right? I'm supposed to be able to boot up my favorite game and play it and forget about the world. And the fact that the video game itself is creating part of the worry has me worried. What I'd like to do for the rest of this video is talk. Even after all of these new perspectives, reading my comments, listening to other YouTubers, and doing research on the video game industry and the potential concerns of Tears of the Kingdom specifically, I'm still not worried for the game. And I don't think that you need to be either. Let's go through these concerns. Longest development time of any Zelda to date. Fascinating. People brought this up in the comments, and I think the math checks out. Tears of the Kingdom has now been in development for longer than Breath of the Wild was in development, which is wild. Seriously though, that is kind of crazy that a sequel game that is reusing engine, assets, and map is taking longer than the original. Now, me personally, I don't see this as a red flag. I just think it's a very fascinating part of the creative game development process, and I really hope that we get some behind-the-scenes documentation about the making of this game where they can finally explain to us all of the exact reasons why it took so long. But I do also want to make sure to point out that quote, which is, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad." Now, side note, this is often attributed to Shigeru Miyamoto, and it would be especially topical considering the content of this video, because it's Shigeru Miyamoto, Daddy Zelda. However, in researching this, I found an article from Nintendo Life that quoted a tweet thread from Javed El Sterid questioning the origins of the quote. And apparently there's a lot of evidence, especially from Ethan Johnson, showing that other times and places where the phrase was used. Most notably from Jason Schreiber on GT Interactive in Game Fan, June 1998, page 63, where he says, "A good game is only late until it ships. A bad game is bad forever." Which is also really interesting when we think about this in perspective of Zelda. If they don't do their due diligence and they release the game while it's still in a bad state, it will be bad forever. It's definitely much better to delay and take their time. But I also feel like I need to point out at this point that that's not the exact same quote as the Shigeru Miyamoto quote.
Which makes this researching of the history of the attribution of the quote even just a little bit more confusing. But then again, due to imperfect human memory, quotes are often slightly tweaked when a speaker who knowingly or not is pulling from the learnings of somebody else who taught them something at an earlier point in time.
Like, for example, did you know that the quote, "I've experienced a great deal of pain and suffering in my life, most of which never actually happened," is usually attributed to Mark Twain, but it actually has evidence that it originated from about 9 different sources. So I'd like this quote about a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is bad.
I am getting monumentally sidetracked here. Originating from DLC concepts. The concern before us is that the major concepts for Tears of the Kingdom were nothing more than DLC ideas for Breath of the Wild. I would argue that that is a very good thing. We will have Breath of the Wild plus more. This is basically the argument that I made in my last video, and a lot of people validated me in their theory that Breath of the Wild was more or less like a beta test for a bigger game. My guess is that in terms of the actual gameplay loop, there are some fundamental ideas that they wanted to incorporate into Breath of the Wild originally, but that were too big and too complicated to do in Breath of the Wild's development time, but were so big and so fun that they thought, well, if we can make a sequel, we can implement that thing now into the current systems. And don't worry, I come with receipts that all but prove my theory. In 2019, Kotaku held an interview with Eiji Aonuma, the Legend of Zelda series producer, who spoke through an English-Japanese translator. Here's the last question and answer in the article. The interviewer said, "Was this sequel originally planned as a DLC?" And Aonuma responded, "Initially, we were thinking of just DLC ideas, but then we had a lot of ideas, and we said, this is too many ideas. Let's just make one new game and start from scratch." Sharing assets, engine, and map with Breath of the Wild. I wanted to throw this concern in as its own concern because a lot of people were mentioning it kind of separated from the DLC, but I don't think that we need to necessarily talk about it much more, because everything that I just said about the DLC applies here too. We're reusing the assets and the engine and the map, so now we get to make those things far more deeper and more nuanced than they were in the original game. Distrust in Nintendo and video game development corporations in general. The entertainment industry is an industry, and businesses participate in said industry because they enjoy developing entertainment and they enjoy making money. At the end of the day, they want to make money. And if they make a great product, I think they should earn some money. Stating that a corporation is lazy and that they're going to cut corners in order to make a ton of extra money without actually providing a lot more value, I understand when that criticism is made about corporations and franchises that have a history of doing that. Nintendo is not one of those companies. Nintendo is notorious, not for releasing unfinished games, but for taking way too long and releasing their games late because they're so hypercritical of themselves and so dedicated to launching the very best game possible. Yes, Nintendo does some bad stuff, but releasing lazy, unfinished games is not a Nintendo issue. Laziness is not something that Nintendo struggles with. Hardware limitations. Pokemon Scarlet Violet released recently, and bad. There weren't just bugs, but severe performance issues, major frame drops. The game was extremely poorly optimized for the Switch. And so the question becomes, if Pokemon, which is probably significantly smaller than Tears of the Kingdom will be, couldn't run well on the Switch, how is there any hope that Tears of the Kingdom will play well? And I think this is probably one of the most valid concerns on the list, to be honest. Breath of the Wild ran pretty good most of the time, but whenever you get too many particle effects or too many entities in the same room, you get one too many monsters, you get too much lightning, you get too many bomb arrows, the frame rate starts to dip. And even 5 years ago, when I understood very little about game design, game mechanics, or video games generally, I noticed that it didn't play back super well at specific points, as me playing as a very casual gamer. So this same game that is essentially the package of Breath of the Wild plus tons more, how is that gonna perform well on this hardware that could barely handle the original game? It's a very valid question. I don't know. I think the only answer is Nintendo has to spend a crazy amount of time in optimization. And my guess is that's another reason why development time has taken so long. And the hope is that Nintendo spends longer optimizing and streamlining the Tears of the Kingdom code and engine so that it will run well on the Switch, unlike what Pokemon did. There's a subset of Zelda fans who feel like Breath of the Wild isn't even a true Zelda game. Now, this is one that I don't think has a solution. There were quite a few people who were saying they enjoyed Breath of the Wild more or less for what it was, but it felt like a new genre. To them, it didn't feel like a Zelda game at all. For them, Zelda was the intricate puzzle boxes that you solve from the inside out. It was the unique bosses, the unique temples, and this charming world, and the soundtrack. Breath of the Wild had almost none of those things. So everything that the most hardcore Zelda fans focusing on Ocarina of Time wanted in a Zelda game that they thought was a Zelda game was not present in Breath of the Wild, which is fascinating because Breath of the Wild is a lot less like Ocarina of Time, but it is actually a lot more like the original Zelda game. Breath of the Wild definitely reimagined the 3D Zelda game by basically taking the original 2D Zelda game and applying it to 3D in a way that Ocarina of Time couldn't. And while that makes it more Zelda based on the first Zelda, that actually does make it a lot different than what Ocarina of Time was doing. And I don't think that I have an answer for these fans. If you didn't see my other video, I talk quite a bit about my theories of how Tears of the Kingdom will be different and how Nintendo could bring back some linearity, some unique dungeons, some unique bosses. I think that there's a way to get a bit more of the Ocarina of Time Zelda identity into Tears of the Kingdom, but we have no idea if they're going to do that. The fear of getting let down, the history with other franchises. This one makes the most sense to me. From what I can tell, the video game industry as a whole is riddled with disappointments. Games unfinished at launch, microtransactions, pay-to-win schemes, poor treatment of employees and developers, corporate greed, absolutely atrocious adaptations of beloved IPs, and yes, even new installments in video game series and direct sequels that disappointed and were not nearly as good as the originals. Honestly, the more I've become an adult and looked at the entertainment industry as an industry, the more I've realized the problems that exist, and there's a lot of them. I don't think that curbing expectations is uncalled for. There's a certain amount of just like being a fan that kind of sucks. And I think sometimes in our online presence of making fun of the toxic fans, we end up getting a bit too dismissive of the legitimate consequences of caring about something. I didn't grow up playing Halo, and even I'm cringing in disbelief at the new TV show. So I can't imagine what it would be like to grow up having played Master Chief and wondered what he looked like, and then it was that. I think that there is quite a lot of wisdom in purposefully curbing your expectations. When Star Wars Episode 7 was about to be released, I purposefully avoided all teasers, all spoilers of any kind, and while I was really hyped internally, I forced myself to try to push down that hype a little bit, to not get too excited about it. And by so doing, I went in with fairly reasonable expectations, and I enjoyed the film. And I know a lot of people who absolutely hate that film. And I think a big part of that was they went in with high expectations and ended up being basically a rehash of Star Wars Episode 4 with new characters. And I understand why they got disappointed. If you spend a lot of time theorizing about exactly how you want Tears of the Kingdom to be, and you have an idea in your head of how this game is going to play, you are probably guaranteed to come away with disappointment. Because you're not the game director, and the devs at Nintendo are doing what they're doing. And so if you expect Tears of the Kingdom to be a very specific way, and if you build up your hopes uncontrollably, you probably will end up disappointed. At the end of the day, I hate to be this guy, at the end of the day, it's a game. If Tears of the Kingdom releases and it ends up being a huge disappointment, I will be sad. I will be angry. I will probably complain about it. I might make a video about it. I'll be pissy and moody for a week or two. And then it'll be over. And I almost think that the hype of being excited for the game, lasting months and years, will make those few weeks of disappointment still worth it. It's fun to be hyped. And if there's anything that it's safe to get our expectations up about, it's entertainment. You know, it's a lot scarier to have expectations for a girl or for a job and for that to not work out, because that actually matters. But to be excited about Tears of the Kingdom and then it being a bad game, who cares? I mean, I care, you care, we care, but you see what I'm saying. At the end of the day, it's benign. It's just entertainment. Based on these concerns and the way that we've addressed them, I'm still pretty hyped. And I hope maybe this video can help you be too, if you want to. Thank you so much for watching. It was really exciting to see the last video pop off so well. And assuming that this one gets at least a few views, I'm pretty happy with the direction that this channel is going. To that effect, actually, there's been quite a few people who have specifically requested for me to not only talk about Zelda. They've seen my other video game content, specifically some of my challenge videos, and they thought that they were really good, and I'm really pleased that you did. I want to clarify, I do not intend on being a Zelda channel. I will talk about games a lot, and I will talk about games that I care about, and there will be more Tears of the Kingdom videos. But don't worry, I have a lot of plans for this channel. I have a ton of reviews to do. I have game challenges, artistic challenges, documentaries to make. I've worked in video production and marketing and filmmaking for almost a decade now, and I'm using some of those skills for this channel. If you like Zelda, subscribe, but also if you like silly online personalities with a decent skill set for video, also please subscribe, because there's a lot more coming. So tune in next time when we get all dramatic again.